Before you can protect anything, you have to know what you have and how sensitive it is. That is the entire logic of Domain 2. Asset security starts with classification. And if you get classification wrong, every downstream control is solving the wrong problem.
Think of classification like a hospital triage system. A patient who comes in with a paper cut does not get the same resources as someone having a heart attack. Same idea here. Not every piece of data deserves the same treatment, and knowing the difference is what makes protection efficient.
NIST SP 800-60 formalizes this for federal systems, and ISC² ties it directly to asset value. The spec is clear. Classification drives everything: storage controls, transmission requirements, access decisions, and disposal standards.
And when organizations skip classification, they pay for it in headlines. Target 2013 is the textbook case: payment card data sitting on a network segment alongside HVAC controls, because no one classified what was sensitive and what was not. 40 million cards stolen.
Stick around to Scene 6. We will walk through the Target breach in detail and show exactly how classification failure enabled lateral movement. The setup is in this scene. The payoff is there.
By the end of this video, you will apply both government and commercial classification schemes, assign the correct role for each stakeholder, and identify the sensitive data types the exam loves to test on.
Quick intros before we jump in.
Hey, I'm Michael. Honestly, I am hyped for this one.
I'm Nova. I love when the numbers tell a story people miss.
River here. The bigger picture on this is what got me excited.
Great team. Let us get into it.
The CISSP exam tests two classification schemes: the U.S. government system and a generic commercial model. They use different labels but the same principle: T. Each tier gets a defined set of controls, and the higher the tier, the stricter the controls.
The U.S. government scheme has 4 tiers. Unclassified is at the bottom, publicly releasable or not yet evaluated. Confidential means unauthorized disclosure causes damage to national security. Secret causes serious damage. Top secret causes exceptionally grave damage. That gravity scale is what separates the tiers, not the content type, but the impact of exposure.
The commercial equivalent maps roughly the same way, Nova. Public is what you post on your website. Internal is internal operations data. Confidential is sensitive business data like contracts or financials.
Restricted is the commercial crown jewel tier, source code, trade secrets, regulated data. The label differs, but the principle is the same: higher tier, tighter controls.
Critical exam point: the labels themselves are not standardized across organizations. One company's confidential is another's sensitive. What is standardized is the structure. Every organization must define its tiers, define controls per tier, and document the scheme in policy.
That mapping failure is what breach investigations always surface. The data existed and the controls existed, but nobody connected this data type to that protection tier. Classification policy exists to draw that line.
For the exam, know both schemes cold. Know the 4 government tiers in order and be able to match commercial tier names to what they protect. Questions love to swap tier names, understand the concept, not just the labels. Classification is only meaningful if someone is accountable for assigning it and someone is responsible for enforcing it. The CISSP defines 4 roles that divide those responsibilities. Getting these roles right is one of the most tested areas in Domain 2.
The data owner is the business executive or senior manager responsible for the data. Think of them as the landlord. They set the rules for the property, but they do not necessarily live there. The owner assigns the classification level and accepts liability for it.
The data custodian is the IT or security team that implements what the owner decided. They do not set the classification, the owner does that. The custodian backs up the data, applies encryption, manages access controls. They are the building manager executing the landlord's rules.
Data steward is a newer role that GDPR and data governance frameworks pushed into the foreground. The steward manages data quality, metadata, and governance. They make sure the data is accurate and correctly documented. Different from the custodian, Michael, who manages protection.
For GDPR specific questions, the exam distinguishes two more: controller and processor. The controller is the organization that decides what data to collect and why. They set the purpose and means. The processor handles data on the controller's behalf, like a cloud provider or payroll vendor.
The exam trap here is mixing up owner and custodian. A common wrong answer puts security implementation responsibility on the data owner. Remember, the owner classifies and accepts accountability. The custodian implements protection. Accountability flows up to the owner. Implementation flows down to the custodian. That direction matters on the exam.
If the exam describes the CFO approving data classification levels for financial records, that is the data owner. If it describes the DBA applying encryption to the finance database, that is the data custodian.
Classification labels tell you the tier, but you also need to know what types of data trigger regulatory regimes. The exam tests 4 categories of sensitive data that each carry their own legal obligations, handling requirements, and breach consequences.
Personally identifiable information is the broadest category, any information that can identify an individual. Name, social security number, date of birth, address, email, financial account numbers. An IST's definition expands further. Even non-obvious combinations like zip code plus gender plus birth year can re-identify individuals.
Protected health information is personally identifiable information in a healthcare context, but with a specific legal definition under HIPAA. There are exactly 18 identifiers: names, geographic data below the state level, dates except year, phone numbers, emails, social security numbers, and more. If your organization touches any of those in a healthcare context, HIPAA controls apply.
PCI data is specifically cardholder data under PCI DSS, the primary account number, the 16-digit card number plus cardholder name, service code, expiration, and the sensitive authentication data like CVV. Nova PCI is interesting because it is a contractual regime, not a law. Merchants accept it when they process cards.
Exactly, Michael, and that distinction matters on the exam. And HIPAA and GDPR are laws with criminal penalties. PCI DSS is a contractual standard enforced through fines and card network sanctions. The mechanism of enforcement is different even though the security controls overlap.
And intellectual property rounds out the list: trade secrets, patents, copyrights, trademarks, source code. These are not regulated the same way personally identifiable information is, but their classification usually lands at the top tier. Loss of IP can be existential for a company, even without a breach notification law triggering.
Drop in the comments which sensitive data type does your organization handle the most, and do you feel like your classification policy actually reflects the regulatory exposure it creates?
Classification means nothing if you do not know what you are classifying. That is the asset inventory problem too, and it is one of the most underestimated challenges in real security programs. You cannot assign a label to data you do not know exists.
Assets span 5 categories on the CISSP: FEN data assets, hardware assets, software assets, personnel assets, and facilities. Each category can carry sensitive information, and each requires classification. A server is a hardware asset, but the data on it may be restricted.
Discovery methods break into 3 approaches. Active scanning uses tools to probe the network, MAMP, vulnerability scanners, asset management databases. Passive monitoring observes traffic without probing. Manual audits walk the floor or query business units.
Shadow IT is the classification killer. Employees spin up cloud storage, download unapproved apps, email files to personal accounts, and none of that data ever enters the asset inventory. It bypasses classification entirely because the organization does not know it exists.
A proper asset register for each identified asset should capture a unique identifier, the data owner, the classification level, the physical or logical location, and the controls currently applied. Without those fields, classification is a label with no enforcement path.
The inventory is also your starting point for risk assessment. You cannot quantify asset value, which feeds into annualized loss expectancy calculations from Domain 1, without knowing what assets you have and what their classification is. These domains are tightly linked. River.
Target 2013 is the case study for why classification matters. The breach did not start with a hacker targeting payment cards. It started with credentials stolen from a third-party HVAC vendor that Target had given network access to for remote monitoring.
That vendor had network access. And once attackers had that foothold, they discovered that Target's internal network was essentially flat. The HVAC monitoring segment connected to the same network that ran point-of-sale systems. Nobody had classified cardholder data at a level that required isolation.
Think of it like a hospital where the IT closet, the records room, and the pharmacy are all on the same unlocked hallway. There is no physical classification matching the sensitivity of what is inside. Anyone with a key to the building has access to everything.
PCI DSS Requirement 1.3 specifically requires that cardholder data environments be isolated from other networks. Had Target enforced that classification, driven segmentation, lateral movement from the HVAC segment to the POS systems would have been blocked at the network boundary.
Approximately 40 million credit and debit card numbers were stolen during the holiday shopping season. It cost Target over $200 million in breach costs, settlements, and security upgrades. The breach was enabled not by exotic malware, but by a classification and segmentation failure.
The fix was exactly what classification demands. I label cardholder data at the highest tier, segment the network to match that label, apply least, privilege vendor access, and monitor what crosses segment boundaries. Classification is the instruction manual for your controls. Skip the classification and your controls are guessing.
Remember this one: classification is not a label on a spreadsheet. It is the decision that tells every other security control what to do. If you forget everything else from Domain 2, classification first, everything else follows.
Let us lock in the exam relevant points from this video before the quiz. Classification scheme. Know both the U.S. government 4-tier model and the commercial model. The labels differ between organizations, but the structure is consistent. Each tier maps to a defined set of controls.
On ownership roles, the exam describes a scenario and asks which role is responsible. Owner equals classification and accountability. Custodian equals implementation and day-to-day protection. Steward equals governance and data quality. Controller and processor are GDPR'd. Specific roles not the same as owner and custodian. Know which framework you are in before picking an answer.
Sensitive data types, personally identifiable information is the broadest. Protected health information is healthcare personally identifiable information under HIPAA's 18 identifiers. PCI data is contractually regulated cardholder data. Know which regulatory regime applies to each type. IP includes trade secrets, patents, and source code, not regulated by breach notification laws but classified at the highest tiers for business risk reasons.
And the target case teaches the operational lesson: classification that is not reflected in network segmentation and access controls is just paperwork. The value of a classification scheme comes from enforcement, the controls that match the label.
Commonly tested on the exam may describe a scenario where an organization discovers sensitive data in an unexpected location. The correct response is always classification review first, then apply controls, not the reverse.
The exam also loves to test whether you know that classification is the data owner's responsibility, not IT, not security, not the CISO. The business executive who owns the data decides the classification. Security implements it. That distinction shows up in multiple choice distractors.
In the real world, enforcement is where classification programs fail. Organizations write detailed policies that map sensitivity tiers to control requirements. And then the access controls, network segments, and data loss prevention configurations do not reflect those labels. A restricted asset ends up on a share accessible to half the company. The target breach is the canonical example. But in practice, security practitioners see this gap every day: classification on paper without classification in the infrastructure.
I have seen mature enterprises with published classification policies where the IT team had no idea what tier any given system was operating at. The policy existed, the labels existed, but the controls did not match. That is not a documentation problem. That is a governance problem, and exactly the kind of scenario the CISSP exam will put in front of you.
The exam tests whether you know the roles, the tier structures, and the regulatory frameworks. When you earn the CISSP and start applying it, the practitioner's job is closing the gap between the label and the control. Classification without enforcement is just paperwork. That is the real-world lesson Domain 2 is built around.
Next up is the quiz, 3 questions on classification levels, ownership roles, and sensitive data types. After that, stick around for asset handling requirements in video 2.2, where we cover what you actually do once you know what classification something carries.
All right, quiz time! Let's find out what's stuck. Think through each question carefully before you answer.
If this video is worth your time, a like and subscribe is worth 2 seconds of yours. We will see you in the next one.
A senior executive approves the classification level for customer financial records. What data role does this executive hold? The correct answer is D, data owner, accountable for assigning classification and data decisions.
Which U.S. government classification level is assigned to information whose unauthorized disclosure could cause serious damage to national security? The correct answer is D, secret unauthorized disclosure causes serious damage to national security.
A cloud vendor processes patient health records on behalf of a hospital. Under GDPR, what role does the cloud vendor hold? The correct answer is A, data processor, processes personal data on behalf of the controller.
Excellent work on the quiz. Classification is the master key in Domain 2. Every control decision you make downstream depends on getting that label right. If you leave this video with one thing, let it be the owner-custodian distinction and why it matters for accountability.
If the classification analogy clicked for you today, hospital triage, landlord, tenant, then the next video is going to feel very natural. We are going to take those classification levels and attach real handling requirements to them.
Next video is CISSP 2.2 information and asset handling requirements. We cover labeling, marking, storage, transmission, and sanitization standards, all driven by the classification work we did today. Watch it now to complete the Domain 2 foundation.
If this video helped, please subscribe. It tells the algorithm this content is worth showing to the next CISSP. Candidate who searches for domain 2. Stay curious, everyone.
Thanks for studying with us. Professor Erica signing off.